Journalists around the world are sometimes killed doing their jobs. People don't always take notice, but Jamal Khashoggi's homicide struck a chord. Our guest today was a close friend, and he saw Jamal the day before he was killed in the Saudi Arabian consulate in Istanbul. We're going to talk about Jamal's death, the rule of Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, and the role of the media, the international reaction, and the ramification of the killing. I'm Ahmed Aliolu, and I'm speaking with the former head of the Institute of Islamic Political Thoughts, Azzam Tamimi, one-on-one.
Jamal Khashoggi was the best Saudi journalist ever to characterize the personality of Mohammed bin Salman. As a human being, he was the most gentle, he was kindest, he was the most considerate. And I really hope that the murder of Jamal Khashoggi will not be in vain, and that this will bring down this corrupt dynasty.
Thank you, Dr. Tamimi, for joining TRT World. Everybody is speaking about Jamal Khashoggi's story, and you're a good friend of him. Can you please describe him to our viewers? He was a journalist, he was an insider, and we know that he was a good friend of Osama bin Laden. So a very controversial person. Did he deserve that kind of end, do you think?
Well, really, there is no controversy at all about him. I mean, at the time when bin Laden was a hero in the eyes of the world, Jamal Khashoggi was on good terms with him, like so many others, including the CIA. So context is very important here. But Jamal Khashoggi, as a human being, he was the most gentle, he was the kindest, he was the most considerate. And he did a great job, whatever he did, whether he was part of the diplomatic corps of Saudi Arabia or acted as a journalist. Nobody deserves the fate Jamal Khashoggi met. And I think it's just horrendous, it's just unbelievable what happened to him.
Do you think that Mohammed bin Salman, the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, gave the order to kill Jamal Khashoggi?
Well, if the man is murdered in his own country's consulate, and if the government already admits that he was murdered inside there, and that his murder was pre-planned, premeditated, and when all the culprits are in Saudi custody, and they are not doing anything about it, it is just inconceivable that such a crime would be committed without an order rather than just a mere acknowledgement from the top man in Saudi Arabia. And the top man in Saudi Arabia is Mohammed bin Salman.
Jamal Khashoggi, in one of the leaked tapes that we have, spoke to the Newsweek, in which he was very critical to Mohammed bin Salman. And he said that Mohammed bin Salman, the Crown Prince, wanted both ways. He wants to present himself, to put himself forward as a reformer of his own country, and on the same time, he wants to rule the same as predecessors did before the 1970s. Do you think this kind of criticism sealed his faith?
Jamal Khashoggi was the best Saudi journalist ever to characterize the personality of Mohammed bin Salman. And I think what infuriated Mohammed bin Salman was the fact that he had been spending millions of dollars and millions of pounds in this country to buy lobby groups, to influence various politicians and people of the media, and also to operate PR companies in order to create an image of himself as a liberal, as a moderate, as a modernist, as a reformist. And in one column in the Washington Post, Jamal Khashoggi destroyed all of this because he told the world what Mohammed bin Salman was exactly.
But don't you think that Mohammed bin Salman is a reformer? He is doing some great stuff that nobody in the royal family before him dared even to speak about.
Well, the word reform has become a victim. It's a victim of dictators like Mohammed bin Salman, who claim to be a supporter of women's rights, giving them a God-given right to drive cars, but at the same time imprisoning them when they ask for more, a little bit more than just the right to drive cars. No, he is just a despot. He's a tyrant.
But don't you think that there is a kind of stereotype here, like a kind of the decision already has been taken by some of the Islamists, some of the media groups, and they've already accused Mohammed bin Salman, even the investigation is still ongoing, and they already took the decision that he is the one who ordered the killing of Mohammed bin Salman. Don't you think that there is a kind of revenge sentiment here?
No, this is not an issue of the Islamists. I mean, read the New York Times, read the Washington Post, watch CNN and the various American TV channels, media outlets around the world.
Well, that's what I'm talking about. Now, lots of journalists have been killed on camera in Palestine, in Gaza, in Europe, everywhere in the world, but none of them has been heard like Jamal Khashoggi. The media coverage was not the same way. Why, Jamal? It's not, of course, you can't tell me that it's because he's a contributor to the Washington Post, he was killed in this way, and that he deserved this kind of coverage.
Well, having been a contributor to the Washington Post is a factor, definitely, but there are a number of other factors that came together. The fact that he was murdered inside his country's consulate is very important. I mean, we haven't heard of a crime like this before. Probably there was once something similar done, but not to such an important personality, because I heard that a Libyan once was lured into the Libyan consulate in Jeddah and he was murdered there. But he wasn't a significant personality. So being significant like Jamal Khashoggi and being murdered in this way and being murdered in Turkey is also another important factor, because here you're violating the sovereignty of another country. You're trying to humiliate them by committing a most horrendous crime and then behaving as if you can get away with it. So a number of factors really combine together to make this a completely unique crime.
You said Turkey. When we come to the investigations, ongoing investigations here in Turkey, why do you think the Turkish officials adopted the drip tactic? They do have evidence, don't you think so? Why don't they reveal whatever they have in hand and just finish the story?
In my personal assessment, the strategy pursued by the Turks has been a very clever one. Well measured, and it was intended to expose the evilness of the crime and at the same time the hypocrisy of the Saudi establishment and those who pay lip service to it. So they tried in the beginning to treat this as just a criminal incident. And they said to the Saudis, come and help us. Let's work together on it. But step after step, day after day, hour after hour, the Saudis were lying, were changing their testimony, were changing their narrative, and the whole world could see what sort of regime exists in Riyadh. I think the lack of cooperation, on the part of Saudi Arabia was pivotal for the exposure of the nature of that regime.
But the Saudis are saying that this is our own issue. They've sent their own prosecutor of Saudi Arabia to Istanbul to cooperate, and he asked for evidence from the Turkish side. And it seems, according to the Saudis' narrative, that they didn't get that evidence. They asked for the mobile phone, they asked for lots of things. So don't you think that the Turkish side should be offering more cooperation?
This is really ludicrous. I mean, imagine the Saudi Attorney General coming to Istanbul, having allegedly locked up the culprits, why then doesn't he tell us where the corpse is, where the body is? And really, all he was interested in is just filling his bags with Turkish delight and take it back home. That was really a most ridiculous...
But there are 18 Saudi nationals who are in custody, and we know that one of them, though the reports speaking about that he's still free, Saud al-Qahtan, who is the Steve Bannon of Mohammed bin Salman, and he's the media advisor who helps taking all his messages across to the everywhere in the world, and he's in custody, we understand. He's been interrogated along with the deputy chief of the intelligence, Ahmed al-Asiri. So there is an ongoing process. Why don't you buy into this kind of narrative, a very solid story coming out from Saudi Arabia?
It's not solid at all. It's most feeble. It's on most shaky grounds. Nobody believes that the Saudis are serious about investigating this.
Donald Trump does.
That's another joke.
What's the joke in that? The President of the United States?
Well, if you saw what he did yesterday with the correspondent of CNN, you'd know what sort of president he is. I tweeted this morning that if Trump could get away with being another Mohammed bin Salman, he would have done it. Because this is just the same mentality. Trump is a gangster. And of course, Trump is the one who brought Mohammed bin Salman to power in Saudi Arabia. So he hates to lose him. I mean, look at this, the meeting that Mohammed bin Salman had with a delegation of Christian Zionists from the United States of America, who came to get assurances from him.
But this is the work of any politician. Any statesman would do the PR, would go and promote his own policies everywhere in the world. Why it's allowed to anybody but not Mohammed bin Salman?
Not if you are in a country in which the king has the title of Khadim al-Haramain. You don't do this.
Why?
Because if you are the custodian of the two holy shrines, he just wouldn't sell Palestine to the Zionists.
Did he?
Yes, of course.
How did you come to this conclusion?
In that meeting about which the head of the delegation gave full details in an interview with the Israeli Channel 10, he told us that Mohammed bin Salman was heading toward being the Arab leader who will next recognize the state of Israel, do what it takes in order to help Netanyahu.
And do you think that's why Netanyahu is supporting Mohammed bin Salman now?
It goes without saying.
Okay. Now, when it comes to the investigation, do you think at some point that this case will fade away because it's not interesting to the media anymore? People would move away from the story.
I don't think it will fade away. I think what happens here is that if you imagine the world media to be a tribe, one of the dear children of this tribe has been massacred, brutalized, and now we hear from the Turks that his body was even dissolved in acid. The tribe of the media of the world would want justice for their son. And I don't think that the Washington Post, the New York Times, the CNN, the BBC, the whole world media will forget or forgive this crime.
Back to the international reaction of what's going on. You know about the Davos in the desert, Mohammed bin Salman Initiative for the Future. Lots of international businesses, media groups, banks pulled out from the... do you think that's because of the media coverage or because they have their kind of ethical, moral responsibilities and they think that they shouldn't be attached to MBS anyway?
Well, some of them might have their own ethical reasons for it, but I think mostly it's because of media pressure. The business community generally thinks about profit and loss, but in this case, they cannot afford to restrict it to actual financial benefits and losses because the media is after them. And what happened in the Saudi consulate in Istanbul is just unimaginable, and people couldn't neglect it. And that's why I believe if the media continues to exercise that pressure on the business community, on the political society, this issue will never die.
And do you think anybody would one day be held accountable?
Well, that's the hope. That's the hope. Of course, we as Muslims believe that if justice isn't served in this world, it will eventually be served in the hereafter. But we'd love to see it served in this world as well. And I really hope that the murder of Jamal Khashoggi will not be in vain, and that this will bring down this corrupt dynasty.
Do you think an international investigation is still possible? Is anybody going to internationalize the case? Or does Turkey in particular interested in that?
I think there are avenues for an international investigation. For instance, as Amnesty International suggested, the Turkish government could ask the Security Council to set up an investigation. But the problem with international investigations and things that are linked to the United Nations is that powers start playing games and negotiating. But I'm not exactly sure where this is going to lead. But there are avenues, as I understand.
You were speaking about playing games. Do you think, because lots of rumors circulating in social media about a possible deal, you know, from the one hand, Turkey wants the United States to back away from the YPG in Manbij. They have some geopolitical interest in northern Syria. On the other hand, you have the United States wants more, especially Donald Trump administration, access to weapons. They're not going to give up these arms deals easily. So do you think a deal is possible to just cover up whatever happened and just move away and continue? He's not the last one.
The Turkish conduct so far proves to us that the Turks are not going to sell Jamal Khashoggi. I'm confident that this will not happen. And this is what matters. What really matters is for Turkey to remain steadfast and to insist on keeping this case alive.
You've always speaking about Mohammed bin Salman and he must go. Now, originally it was believed that the autocratic kind of authoritative regimes used to put out every message because they control the sender, the medium, the channel. But now it's an international story and everybody knows what's happening. Why do you think that they still insist on the narrative they're producing?
Well, the Saudis, the Saudi establishment and those who speak for it have proven to be very unwise in the way they executed this crime, in the way they tried to cover up, in the way they kept changing their narrative, and in the way they are today dealing with the entire issue. And I think the more this continues, the more they are exposed. This is a scandal. This is one of the biggest scandals in modern history. And someone in Saudi Arabia should be worried about this.
But at the end of the day, what's going to happen? Do you think that the killing of Jamal Khashoggi will lead to the departure of Mohammed bin Salman? Is this something, a kind of practical solution? Do you think this will happen?
The only way out of this predicament for Saudi Arabia is for Mohammed bin Salman to disappear. If he doesn't...
Who's going to replace him?
Well, every single member of the Saudi royal family is better than him. He is the worst of the worst. And that's why when he took power, he removed everybody.
Do you think there is a political willing among the royal family to do so? Especially when we know that the king appointed him in the intelligence overhaul, the reform of the intelligence. He's the chief of that kind of reform.
From what I hear, there is a desire on the part of several members of the royal family to see a change. It may not be easy because the king is senile, he's out of touch, his son controls him completely. Because Mohammed bin Salman took over the Interior Ministry, the Defense Ministry, the National Guard, the media, Aramco. everything is within his grip. It's likely to be a little bit difficult, but it will have to be done.
Do you think Donald Trump will let Mohammed bin Salman, his partner, and his son-in-law, Jared Kushner, will allow Mohammed bin Salman to leave?
Mohammed bin Salman has become a liability. A liability even for the likes of Trump and Kushner.
But he's the only partner where they can deal easily, and he's the one who they consider as the partner against Iran in the region.
That's not true. Saudi Arabia has always been loyal to America. I mean, since King Abdulaziz. The Saudis have been buying American weapons, doing America's bid in the region. Who said so? I know the reason Mohammed bin Salman is in power today is because of the repercussions of the downfall of the Arab Spring. It's all to do with what Mohammed bin Zayed in the UAE has been trying to do in order to prevent another wave of Arab revolutions. So he convinced the newcomer to the White House that your best bet would be Mohammed bin Salman. Mohammed bin Nayef was the traditional ally of
Mohammed bin Nayef is the deposed crown prince.
Yes, and Trump sacrificed him because of what Mohammed bin Zayed said to him about the benefits he is likely to end up reaping with the coming to power of Mohammed bin Salman.
What about the region? So Mohammed bin Zayed is the godfather, as they say, of Mohammed bin Salman. Do you think that this kind of ramification will cast any shadows on the Palestinian cause, for example, on the Egyptian cause as well? What kind of effects it will have?
Well, eventually it will have, because many people resemble Jamal Khashoggi to Mohamed Bouazizi of Tunisia. It is very likely that the murder of Jamal Khashoggi will trigger another outburst. We know, and we knew this before, that the Arab revolutions, when they were crushed, were waiting for another event in order to resume their cycle, because historic change comes in cycles. It doesn't come at once.
Do you think this is going to happen inside Saudi Arabia? Anything is possible?
It can happen in Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia today has a large population of young men and women who are highly educated, who are so frustrated with this dynasty and the way it deals with them. And that's why Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates.
So that might lead, lots of observers would say, to another cycle of chaos.
Is there more chaos than killing a renowned journalist inside the consulate in Istanbul? This is the chaos. This is what the Saudi government is doing. This is what Mohammed bin Salman is doing.
They would say this is a crime and the perpetrator of the crime would be held accountable. But why should we have another cycle of violence in Saudi Arabia to oust Mohammed bin Salman?
Initially, the Arab revolutions were peaceful everywhere, whether in Tunisia, Egypt, Syria, Libya, Yemen, they were peaceful.
Mohammed bin Salman is threatening, lots of reports speaking about this, to depart completely from the orbit of the United States and coming closer to Russia, China. And do you think this is something that possible could happen?
I personally saw a top secret document in which Mohammed bin Salman writes to one of his most senior aides, telling him, and that was immediately after he returned from the FA Cup in Moscow, that from now on we want to start buying weapons from Russia and provide military training in collaboration with the Russians. It's possible that he might try to do this. Will it work or not? I don't know. The Russians definitely have a stake in this. But I'm not here in the business of favoring the Americans to the Russians or the Russians to the Americans. We are here talking about a heinous murder, a terrible murder of someone who was very dear to me.
What's the last thing you hope to happen so that the people are satisfied and you as a friend would be satisfied that Jamal's blood was not in vain?
Well, I'd love to see an open public trial of those who committed the murder. The Saudis acknowledge that there were 18 people. They claim they are in custody. Give them to Turkey to put them on trial in public. And let's hear from them.
Thank you, sir. شكرا يا دكتور.
حياك الله.
الله يعطيك العافية.